research. So how might virtual environments actually help urban planners and architects and other, I guess, city builders visualize and optimize designs for human well-being and creating that serendipity that we need?
Sure. Yeah, I think there's certainly some scope for doing that, and obviously I think that because I use it in my research. Um, I think that one way to think of it, and the way that my thoughts have evolved over the time that I've been using those kinds of methods, is that I went in with this really kind of um, simplistic, um, overly optimistic notion that anything that I could model, I could put people into the model in VR, and I would be able to make ironclad predictions about how they would respond to that same thing in real life. And I've had that idealistic notion beaten out of me over years of experimental experience. So I think, and I don't think we understand this completely at all. There are differences between what happens in VR and how we feel and what we do and real life, and some of it is sort of ephemeral, and some of it maybe is less so. But I always say, um, and this is not really satisfactory as an end explanation, but I always say that simply by virtue of the fact that we know that something isn't real, no matter how realistic, no matter how beautiful the model and detailed the model and fantastic the technology, just knowing that, like that the ontological part just means that we're not going to treat it in the same way as a real space. So for me, the interesting questions are around the scope and limits of using those kinds of visualizations for solving practical problems. And I think there is some scope, but there are also some limits. So what we just, this is not exactly hot off the press. It was published in 2020, but I did some work with a then graduate student. Now he's graduated, moved on, Rabah Mazumdar, and we did some research looking at the psychological impact of high density, high rise development. And so that was one of the few cases that I've seen in anybody's work, and certainly the only time that I've been able to do this, where we were able to compare side by side people's responses to a real setting. We found a nice setting in London, where it was really convenient experimentally, because we could have people stand one way and be in front of the Leadenhall building, a substantial high rise, and then just rotate, and they'd be standing in front of some nice heritage religious architecture. And so we compared, we measured differences between responses depending on which way people were standing, and then we just imported all of that into our equipment using 360 video, and did the same comparison in the laboratory. And in that case, I mean, basically what we found was that everything trended in the same directions, but the effects were bigger in the real world than in VR. So if that's all it is, I mean, that's fine, as long as we accept that, effect sizes will be smaller in VR, but they'll line up with the real world. Then that gives us a lot of scope to be able to use VR to make predictions about what might happen in real life. But there's always, this little caveat in the back of my mind that sometimes this is not going to work, and we might not know right away why that is, and that's a tricky thing. And we're still, even though we've been at this for a while, I think it's fair to say we're still learning how to do this well. I mean, going back to what I was saying before about how often we're preoccupied with planning decisions, I think can sometimes be preoccupied with paying attention to what's in our awareness, what we're conscious of. So I'll give you an example. The company that I'm involved in England, because in the city of London, there's so much heritage that planning decisions are just horrendous. I mean, debates can go on for years. There can be
Sure.
court battles that cost a fortune. And so our motivation was basically to think, is there a way they use the science to make predictions about objective predictions about the impact of a design. So the idea was, you could have a proposal turned down because let's say it's a high rise. If the high rise is built, then as you're walking across a bridge across the Thames, for a moment, that high rise would appear in the same frame as St. Paul's Cathedral, and that would scotch it. So this is turning into a long tangent. You probably want to edit this down to something reasonable, but the idea is, okay, well, we can do eye tracking. So we can have people go through a simulation of the bridge. We can put in the high rise, and we can measure whether there are any eye fixations that land on the high rise. And then, my worry about that kind of approach is that, again, it neglects the fact that it's not like eye tracking is only going to tell you about the thing that we're attending. It's not going to tell you about all of the impact of everything else that's in the scene. So, I mean, that's not exactly a criticism of the technology itself, but I guess it's more criticism of the way that sometimes we try to use the biometrics in the technology. There's a lot of I'm going to beat on these people a little bit without mentioning any names, but there's a lot of not a lot, but there's some research that focuses on trying to understand what we like, what we prefer, what we attend to in the built environment, using eye tracking methods, showing people pictures. And one of the findings is that I'm going to be a bit cheeky about this, but I don't think I'm really far off the mark. That, look, if we show this residential structure, then notice how people are focusing, they're fixating on the doors and the windows. And I think, like, what the hell else? Like, what else are they? They're not going to look at the blank walls. What is that really telling you? And it's not telling you anything about how they feel about it.
Right.